So the history of the Jewish people, and we have two classes scheduled, part 1 and part 2, and I think that even someone with a basic rudimentary framework of the volume of Jewish history knows that we can't really cover everything in 3 hours. But we have the option to either try to do that or to just take it at our own pace, and we'll see how far we get. So I opt for the second because I think that besides for just the information, there's the flavor, there's the insights, there's the perspective, kind of the patterns that repeated themselves over and over again. And that's, I think, more important for us than all the actual information and the dates. And I don't want to bore you guys with dates and information and times and migratory patterns and everything like that. But we'll try to get some sort of a picture, a sketch, if you will, of what Jewish history has looked like for the past 38 some odd 100 years or whatever. It depends obviously when you start counting. But a few quick notes before we get started. People think, I think that there's a significant gap between what the importance people assess towards history and perhaps the real importance. We were told, Maimonides writes, he says that there's, in the mitzvah of loving God, very fundamental, crucial, important, pivotal, essential mitzvah, to love God, right? It's the relationship we have with God is one of love and fear. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King. Both those elements have to be in place. But how do you love God, right? The idea of God for us it's an idea, but it's also a distant idea. It's a distant concept. That concept's hard to wrap our head around. The idea of not being bound in time and space, the idea of the infinite, omnipotent, those things are hard for us to understand. How are we going to love God? So Maimonides writes, in multiple places, that the way to do it is to connect to God via His Torah, via His mitzvahs, and via His interaction in history. Because if you actually look at Jewish history, you'll notice clearly that God is manipulating history. Not only that, God predicts it in the Torah, and then it plays out, and looking back, we see it very clearly. The Torah is full of predictions. It writes things with uncanny accuracy that we know now to be true. If you look back today and you look at the things, the phenomena that the Torah foretells about, and you see kind of how unlikely it is for it to have happened, yet it was predicted and it actually did happen, it's remarkable. It's a way to connect to a God who is kind of navigating the Jewish people through history. One quick example, just off the top of my head, where we're told in the Torah that we're going to be exiled. We're going to be in Israel, we're going to be exiled, we're going to come back to Israel. Now, to us, we know that's true. We know that we were in Israel 2,400 years ago, and then we had what's called the Babylonian exile. We were all dispersed. We went to Babylon. We came back to Israel with about 100 years later, 70 years later. We rebuilt the temple, like the term Ezra. Then we have the Romans, the year 70. That's a time period that we're very familiar with. The destruction of the Second Temple, the taking Jerusalem and making it a Judenrat city, the first Judenrat city. The Jewish people dispersed all over the world, North Africa, Europe, primarily to the Near East. And voila, we come back to Israel and reestablish a tremendous Jewish presence in this century. And so what's remarkable about this, we've had a nation here, the Jewish people, that has been exiled not once, but twice, and came back to Israel twice. Now, how many nations in history have been exiled more than once? The answer is
0.
1, the Jewish people.
Well, yeah.
That's it. Aside from the Jewish people. None. Do you know why? Because by definition, when a nation gets exiled, they lose their identity. Right? Once they're not in their land, they don't have their culture, they don't have their language, they don't have their practice, they don't have kind of what kept them together as a nation. They get assimilated and they become no different than the conquering nation or the nation that they are dispersed to. But we, remarkably, even though we remain few in number, as the Torah foretells, we remain few in number, we are despised almost all the time by our neighbors. Yet, against all odds, we remain. We were exiled once, we came back, we exiled again, and now we came back again. So that's just an idea of history. You see involvement. You see these are things or these are realities that have absolutely no precedent anywhere else in history, and it's foretold in the Torah, and God says this is what is going to happen, and it happened. So, when you gain a more perspective in history, you see kind of a new kind of relationship that we could develop with the Almighty via His interaction with our history. That's just one reason why I think it's important. Additionally, I think that we know that in history, especially Jewish history, there are patterns that repeat themselves. And you see this all the way going back to the forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to today. And the Roman period of the first century, we know a lot about that period, and today it's almost identical. You see if you look at the 19th century and the first century of the Common Era, it's almost identical. The exact forces that were going on, the infighting that was happening with the Jewish people, the fragmentation of the Jewish people, identical. And we fail to learn the lessons of history, and eventually the result happens to us again. If you fail to learn the lessons of history, you're bound to repeat them. That was a famous line by some philosopher, right? Thank you. So that's why it's important for us to understand a little bit that whatever issues, political, social, geopolitical, national issues we have today are not new issues. They've happened in history, and it's important for us to take those lessons from past experiences. Perhaps another reason why it's important to learn history is that history is the testing ground for ideas. 100 years ago, we could have had the argument, as the argument was a very popular argument, but a very legitimate argument as to what is a better economic structure for a country, capitalism or communism. Like 100 years ago, that was a valid debate. Today, it is no longer a valid debate. Why? Because we see that capitalism continues flourishing while communism faltered. And China is the communist, but the reason why they're successful is because they adopted capitalism in the 80s. That's why. You see, you don't exactly, you don't have the guards in the Soviet Union. They weren't at the border keeping all the other people out from joining the people's paradise. It was actually keeping the people inside. So it wasn't exactly a paradise, It's clear, right? History has demonstrated that this is, for whatever reason, we could argue the debate, the reasons as to why, but history has demonstrated that it's better off for people to live under a capitalistic economic structure than a communist. Right? That's a simple example that we could learn as well.
Condoleezza Rice said that she didn't see anybody trying to immigrate to China or Russia. It was like that over here.
Exactly. It's true. Why are people wanting to come in here? Because we figured it out. For better or for worse. I'm saying you to tweak it, but either way, the macroeconomic reality that we have in America has been demonstrated to be the best way to go so far. That we're capable of, Okay, now one more thing. When we talk about dates, so I have over here. I wanted to print this out. This is why I have it over here. I have the timeline to give more of a big picture, just when these events happened. Abraham lived 3,800 years ago, roughly. The exact number would be. I could do the math right now in my head real quickly, but the exact number, the exact date in the Jewish calendar is the year 1948. It's a nice, easy number to remember, because in the Jewish calendar, it's the year 1948, which is the same year as in the Gregorian calendar, the founding of the state of Israel. It's an easy number to remember. But we have traditions of dates for all these major events, and the secular world has their dates as well, and sometimes there's discrepancies. And in fact, with regards to the first temple, the end of the first temple period, we're off by about 150, 180 years. I feel like we could feel safe and comfortable by going with the Jewish dates. Number one, because obviously it's the Jewish dates, but number two, because I think it's probably more likely to be accurate. We have always had a system of how we measure time. The Talmud talks about the exact length of a lunar moon. I might have mentioned this. The exact length of a lunar month. Right? This is something that we knew 2,000 years ago. Right? It's 29 days, 12 hours, 44 minutes, and 3 seconds. Down to milliseconds, we have it down in the Torah. We had a system of how to deal with all the. I mean, we knew exactly. The Torah talks about, like the Talmud says that that the exact length of a solar year, etc., etc., etc. Now, our calendar that we have today is perfectly accurate, and it's our calendar today is as accurate as it ever was. So we've had a system of measuring time and keeping track of it, and we have had a standardized record keeping of dates from the Bible, from the books of the prophets. But in the 2nd century, we have a tremendous book called Seder Olam Rabbah, which organized it all, and was a book basically of history with dates, as opposed to in the secular world, every empire in the ancient world kept their own method of keeping time and their own calendar system, and there was no universality or universal standard adopted till like the 19th century, maybe even the 20th century, the Gregorian calendar. So that's why we can feel very comfortable, and the secular scholars, they work backwards. They work backwards, try to piece together the dates, but we have a kind of more of a contemporary insight onto the dates. Okay, now very important. Jewish history, or the Jewish perspective on the world. Forget about Jewish history for a second. Starts from when Adam shows up, which is about the beginning of civilization. Right? What happened before Adam, whether or not there were hundreds of millions of years or 13.8 billion years before that, it's irrelevant to us. It's not what we're talking about. We're talking. It starts from Adam. What happened before that? What we call the 6 days of creation, and these are not simple days because remember we only have constellations. We only have the sun on day 4. We don't know what happened from day 1 to day 2. There's theories we could theorize. There are many theories, and there are those that say, oh, no, it was only 6 days, and those that say, no, it's really 13 billion years, 8 billion years, whatever. Either way, what we know for sure is that we're not starting from there. Our calendar starts from Adam. What happened before that is not relevant to us. But specifically, the Jewish calendar starts from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But I want to give more of a the Talmud has a very short statement where it gives us a perspective of all of Jewish history, really all of the world's history, what we would call, and it says as follows: Shis alfin shana hava alma. Who knows what language that is? Aramaic. That's right, Aramaic. Shis alfin shana hava alma. 6,000 years will be the world. Okay? 2,000 tohu, 2,000 Torah, 2,000 Mashiach. Right. What this tells us, first of all, just before we even get started.
Where is that from?
That's from the Talmud in Sanhedrin. I think it's 98 or 97. I think 98a at the bottom. What it tells us, first of all, before we even get started as to what these breakdown of the 2,000 years are, it tells us, number one, that the world has a beginning, which is what the first word in the Torah, and this has been the Jewish rallying cry for years, and finally the rest of the world has come in the past 50 years to agree to that principle that the world had a beginning. For 2,500 years, the rest of the world was screaming, no, the world's been around forever. And finally, it takes 2,500 years, but eventually they come around, and now the entire world agrees that the world had a beginning. There was a starting point, and there was, before that it didn't exist, and now it came into existence. We say not only does the world have a beginning, it has a conclusion. It has an end. It's finite from beginning and to the end. 6,000 years. What are these 6,000 years? This is from Adam. 2,000 years tohu. Tohu means chaos. 2,000 years Torah. And 2,000 years Mashiach. That's the 6,000 years. Now, what does that mean? We say that this world has a purpose. There's a reason why we're here for. There's something that wasn't at the beginning that will be at the end. And what is that? That is the idea of God being present in the world. God created a world where God is inconspicuous. You look around, you don't see God. Right? We don't interact with, we don't hear God. Right? That's not. We don't have any points of contact, of interaction, of interface with God. God is invisible in the world. The goal of the world is for us, for humans, to bring God to the world and God to be visible and knowledgeable and people talk about God. It's a concept that most people know. Now, remember, 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, the idea of God wasn't part of the vernacular. Now you go anywhere in the world, basically, you talk to people, everyone understands the idea of God. We see already a dramatic progression from God being non-existent or not even, people don't even know about it. Moses comes to Pharaoh and says, God, is it, who's that? He has no idea who he's talking about. Now everyone knows about that. So it starts off the world of tohu, chaos. 2,000 years of paganism. 2,000 years of, perhaps we could say atheism, even though that's not really the correct term. 2,000 years of God being totally invisible, chaos. What happens at the end of that 2,000 years? We meet a fellow by the name of Abraham. And Abraham is unique, is important in Jewish history, but really in world history, because he is the one who's going to take the world of chaos and begin and end that period and usher in the era of Torah. Abraham was the one who, via the deduction of his intellectual capabilities, he deduced and he was able to prove that God existed. And that was a very unique and innovative concept. In fact, he was greeted by a very hostile audience. People weren't ready to hear that. And he faced persecution, but he fired on. And he developed lectures, and he went around town telling everyone around, and he developed a following. The idea of God was no longer non-existent in the world. There was this voice, Abraham and his followers, eventually Abraham and his descendants, that would accept this idea.
So where do we have this documented?
As Abraham?
Written, is it all oral?
No, we have it in the Torah. Torah talks about Abraham in Genesis.
But the Torah was written
That's
much
right.
later. We're talking about 5,800 years ago or whatever. How do we have that documented?
No, you're right. You're right. So it's not contemporary. It's written by Moses, right? The Torah is contemporary to Moses, and if it was just Abraham, if someone came over to me and says, "Hey, there was this guy named Abraham, and he was a wonderful guy, and he was a prophet," and this and that, I would say, "Listen, you got to prove it." Just like if Joseph Smith comes to me and says, "Oh, I found golden tablets, and right, I found golden tablets, and it was written in Reformed Egyptian, and it's now here's the Book of Mormon," you would say, right, the reasonable response of a skeptic is when someone says something fantastic, like they spoke to God or they spoke to an angel, or this and that, you would say, "Well, prove it. How do we know you're not lying?" If Abraham came, yes.
Moses originated the Torah.
We'll get to that point. I just want to answer his question.
What I'm saying is, if we have this history that Abraham preached and he lectured and he went around and where do we have that?
So I said, let me finish. If Abraham came to us, let's say Abraham existed today. He came to us, he said, "Oh, I spoke to God, this and that, wonderful stuff," we would say, "Prove it." Just like if Muhammad came to us and walked in the door and says, "Oh, guys, by the way, I'm a prophet." What would we say? "Well, how do we know that you're not lying?" And that's true for every other prophet besides for Moses. Moses, there was a national revelation. The entire people, 3 million people, right? How do you know 3 million people? 600,500 men between the age of 20 and 60. We could safely assume there was the same amount of women and some youngsters and some adults. So we have at least 1.5 million, perhaps 2, even 3 million people. Depends on how you calculate. So they all see Moses. They have national prophecy, right? When the Jewish people received the Torah, the experience of Mount Sinai, the national revelation of Mount Sinai, was the entire nation. It wasn't just Moses. It was the entire nation. Read the book. Read Exodus, where it talks about it, chapter 20. Read Deuteronomy, where it repeats the story. Everyone was there. V'chol ha'am ro. Everyone saw. Everyone had prophecy. Everyone heard Moses being verified as a prophet. Moses, alei alahar, come up to the mountain. Right? Come up to the mountain. They knew that Moses was a prophet. They were there. They experienced it. They saw that Moses was up on the mountain, didn't come back down for 4 days and 40 nights. Didn't have any food and provisions with him. They knew he was a prophet. Hence, the reason why we believe that Abraham is a prophet is not because of some tradition or something. It's because Moses told us about it. Moses was called a verified prophet. And if you look at Maimonides in the 13 Principles of Faith, Maimonides talks about Moses being Av Hanavim, the father of the prophets. What does it mean Moses is the father of the prophets? All his kids. His oldest son is Abraham, and his next son is Ezekiel. No, the point is that because of Moses, we believe in prophets. We believe in Abraham, we believe in Isaac, even though those happened hundreds of years earlier. Now, that being said, how many generations are there from Moses to Abraham? Not that many. Moses was a great grandson of Jacob. So hence, it's just 2 more generations to Abraham, part of the family. And it was a family that developed a tradition that was unbroken. Right? Abraham to Isaac, Isaac to Jacob, Jacob to Levi, Levi to, I forgot which one of his kids, one of his kids, Kahas, I think it was Kahas, to Yitzhar, to Amram, to Moshe. So it's not so far. It's not like we're talking about thousands of years, especially with regards to when you factor in the amount of generations. But you're right. It's not historical. It's not historical. It's not contemporary. But we know it's true because it says in the Torah, right? And the Torah we got from Moses, and the people that experienced these elements at Sinai, these miracles at Sinai, they were the ones who received the same book from Moses. It means it wasn't like Moses came years after this happened to a different nation. The same people that lived through the miracles in the desert, they sustained from manna falling from the sky, got water from a rock. They were the same ones who got the book that told these narratives and gave the instructions to the Torah. You had a question, David?
So I'm intrigued by one comment. You said that Abraham, at the time of Abraham, there was already about 2,000 years of human history before that?
Well, from Adam to Abraham, right. Yes.
So what? Why did it take so long? Why did God not reveal himself or have someone deduce him earlier? Why did
okay, so this is a very important question. Why did God allow?
History and all
okay, so we're told the term we're all familiar with of we're being a chosen nation. Is that right? Everyone heard the term? Yeah. Jewish people are chosen nation. When in fact it's an incorrect term. We're not the chosen nation. God didn't choose Abraham. The opposite was true. Abraham chose God. Means what God wanted was someone to choose him, someone to develop this philosophy and to make that decision to be the one who's going to be the guard bearer, so to speak, of this philosophy, who's going to accept upon themselves the yoke of responsibility for all of mankind, going to be God's ambassadors to the world, and going to be the family that eventually will be the nation that will do that, fulfill that mission.
I've never heard the phrase as Abraham chose God as compared to other people. Did other people at the time of Abraham, not Moses, but the people at the time of Abraham have an opportunity to choose God?
Well, everyone's had the same opportunity. Just Abraham was. It theoretically could have been anyone. Could have been anyone. Could have been anyone. It wasn't like this is an important thing. Like
I heard also from someone, I don't remember where recently, that with the generation, there's different people of Noah.
Yeah.
That one of them is the one that kind of guided Abraham.
Yes. So what's important to know is that Adam clearly knew about God, right? That we know for sure. However, he didn't learn it on his own. Right? He didn't learn it on his own. It's not like he grew up ignorant and developed it on his own. He passed that on to his kids, right? Somehow that tradition got lost. And Maimonides, if you look at the introduction, or not the first chapter of the laws of idolatry, he goes through the history of how exactly it got lost. So yes, there was this idea of God's existence known at some point to other people aside from Abraham. However, by the time Abraham got around, it was totally gone, totally non-existent, and he, on his own, came to the idea, and therefore he chose to have this philosophy and have this life mission for him and the first kids. Look at God made a pact with Abraham. Right? Your children are going to be my children. They're going to have the land of Israel, and they're going to be the Jewish people. Right? God chose us, but Abraham chose God, and Abraham chose this responsibility for him and for his children. And Abraham took the world of chaos, and the idea of God was introduced. Now the idea of God was going to be around for forever, basically. Abraham, his name was changed from Avram to Avraham. Why? The Torah says because Abraham is to be a father of many nations. Av Hamon Goyim, father of many nations. And we look at the great other monotheistic religions, and they come from Ishmael. Abraham had two kids, Isaac and Ishmael, amongst others, but the two kids that we know about, their names. Isaac and Ishmael. Ki beYitzchak yikaral Chazara. Isaac is the inheritor, the heir of Abraham, but Ishmael is also an Abrahamic descendant, and his children, his descendants, will form Islam. They're the Arabs. They'll form Islam, and they will also do a very, very impressive job in assisting the Jewish people in teaching the world about God. Similarly, Abraham had a kid, Isaac. Isaac had two kids, Jacob and Esau. Esau is the father of Rome, right? That's Edom. They became Rome, and they eventually became the Byzantines, which is the Christians. So Abraham, while the pure, so to speak, Abrahamic progeny would be the Jewish people, Isaac, Jacob, but also all the other nations that taught the world about God also came from Abraham as well. So we have this transition. We have this chaos. We have now Torah. And we actually have, according to the Midrash, Abraham started learning Torah at the age of 52, which would be exactly the year 2000. Exactly the year 2000 would be when Abraham started studying Torah.
Explain what exactly he was studying.
That's a very good question. How did Abraham study Torah when the Torah was not? Okay, this is a good question. Now remember, Abraham was a prophet. And the idea, the hallmark of prophecy is that a prophet can know what happens in the future before it happens, right? Jeremiah is talking about Al Naharot Bavel. We sat on the banks of the river and we were crying. We were just exiled. And the Babylonians come to us and tell us, sing the song of Hashem, song of God. And we start crying, how can we sing the song of God in a foreign land? Right? He wrote this hundreds of years before it happened, right? And contemporary historians, which are not willing to accept the idea of prophecy, well, they'll find it really hard to understand how Jeremiah wrote that. So that's why there's a several hundred-year gap in our dating of Jeremiah, because they're just not willing to accept that he's a prophet. But by definition, a prophet is able to know what happens before it happens. The Torah is written by Moses as per the dictation of God. And it talks about many things that happens. It describes with uncanny accuracy events that happen in the future. And we see now, we look back and we see that actually happened. Right? It describes that. How does it do it? Because it's information given by God via the conduit of the prophet. So the simple answer is that Abraham had Torah because he was a prophet.
Now,
Yeah.
if we're saying that these prophets could prophesy the future, and God already knew what was going on in the future, how do we have individuality and self-determination?
So that's one of the classical philosophical quandaries where you have it's a very, very famous question. You seem very proud of yourself.
No, not proud of it, believe me.
Yeah, so I'm saying that's a famous. I'm sure everyone here has heard the question of determinism versus free will. Like the second you have a God who is present at all times, hence God exists today as much as He exists tomorrow, or 100 years from now, or 100 years ago. How do we have? Try to get back to our original point. How do we have free will? So that's a very good question. Maimonides talks about that in the 5th chapter of the Laws of Tshuva, I believe. And there's many answers given to this question, but I think that there's what I always do with this question is I ask a better question. You think that's a good question? I have a way better question for you. It's not just a problem isolated to free will. It's a problem that is much more expansive than that. Because if God exists, then there's this reality of this overwhelming, ever-present, omnipotent, right, entity, yet there's us. And we're clearly not God. So there's something that God is not. There's something which is distinct from God. Well, how does that work? How do we exist? It's a much more fundamental problem. It's two realities that we know are both true, yet we don't see how they could possibly be compatible. How do we reconcile the idea of a finiteness and infinite kind of coexisting? Huh?
By retraction.
Well, okay, by retraction. So this is
I listened to a big study on this one.
yes. So this is the a Kabbalistic concept called tzimtzum. That's the word given for it, which is, I guess the word used was retraction. That God, sort of speak, limited himself. And God enabled something to exist. It means the way God created was not by actively creating, but rather by limiting himself, and that void, so to speak, was a playing grounds for something else to exist. We could choose. Everyone agrees we could choose. Why? Because we all agree that criminals should be punished. Right? You agree that, I agree that. Everyone agrees. Why should criminals be punished? Obviously, they can choose. But God knows what they choose, but still. So God limits himself, and God means that there's a point within each one of us, humans only, where God is not present, and therefore there's some sort of individuality where we could have a say in the matter.
So then-
How does God limit himself? How does that work? We have no idea.
I mean, I had all the, we all have these ideas about God and what people are. I've always had this idea, and I'm sure millions of others have. Like he put us down on the earth and let us just do our own thing till we got into trouble, and then he would try and resolve things. So it's like we're playing toy soldiers. And things.
Yeah, but it's yes, but it's important. But it's important to also keep in mind that it's not like God created the world and kind of disappeared. The Jewish God is the creator, but also the sustainer and the supervisor. So, we cannot exist unless he's constantly giving us kind of the flow of sustenance, so to speak. Yeah.
So if God withdraws himself,
If God withdraws,
is
then
he in essence not there?
if that were to happen, we're dependent, so to speak, on him. So we would not exist.
No.
It's like, I think of it like an electric current. Like if
He limits himself.
Go back to, yes, if he limits himself, is the fact that he has limited himself to suggest that he isn't there. So if God
in
is
some
everything,
capacity,
is
in
there-
some capacity, God is limiting himself, and he's not there in our decision-making ability. At whatever point we're on our own, God is not there. That's right. How that works, we don't know. But it does work, and we know that intuitively. We all know that intuitively. So we know it exists, even though we don't understand how it exists. But we all know, like we say, it's a common thing. If someone makes a decision, someone does something bad or something that is good, they should be rewarded for their good, right? We have recognition for success, and we have punishment for failure or for bad things. We all know that. No one here wants to argue that all criminals should just be allowed to do whatever they want, right? Because we know intuitively that there's something called free will. We know that. How that works, how does God limit himself, how does God retract himself? We have no idea how it works, but we do know that it exists. Okay, let's go back a step. Where were we before that?
I don't know. We were at free will, but I guess.
Where were we a step before that? Actual history. Okay, let's go back to actual history. Oh, how did Abram have Torah? That's where we were. Sorry.
2,000 years.
How did Abram have Torah? So, there's actually a fascinating midrash about this. The midrash, well, there's actually two midrashes that talk about this. Mehechan lamad Avram Avinu Torah. So the midrash asks, from whence did Abraham study Torah? Right? Torah was brought to the world by Moses at Mount Sinai, and it's now in kind of on the earth, so to speak. It's ours. Torah before that was in the heavens. It was, God used it to create the world. According to the Talmud, it existed 974 generations before the world was created. What that means, I don't know. But there was a reality of Torah before the world. Nachmanides, in his introduction to the Torah, talks about a Torah, the same letters, but different breaks in the letters. So, for example, he says, Bereshit bar Elokim. He has three words as well, but instead of putting the break between the two words after the tuf of Bereshit before the bet, he puts it after the Beis Reish Aleph. That's the break. So what he's saying is that the Torah exists on multiple levels. Like there's the Torah that we got on our human level, but there's also the Torah on a kind of a more spiritual level where he writes it's all names of God. Whatever that means, I don't know. But there's a reality of existence of Torah before it was given to us. So the Midrash asks, how did Abraham have Torah? So it says, so one of them it says, me'atzmo lamad, from himself he learned. From himself he learned. And the other one says that nasnu shtei tluyosav, something l'shtei ma'ayanot. His 2 kidneys became 2 well springs, and he studied from that. What this means is that essentially we all have Torah within ourselves. We all have a soul. A soul has no business being within any one of us. Why? Because it's diametrically opposite. You have physicality and you have pure spirituality, so pure, and I mentioned this 100 times, I'll mention it again, that the Talmud equates the purity of the soul to the purity of the angels and God himself. It has absolutely no business being within ourselves. Right? However, that's what we are. That's what God created us. Half soul, half angel, half body, half beast. Mixed together. But and we only kind of really relate with our body. Right? When we drink coffee, we feel good. When we shake lulav, we feel nothing. Why? Why don't we feel nothing? It's a mitzvah. It's food for the soul. How come we don't feel it? Because we don't have a sensory relationship with our soul. All we sense is our body. Hence, when our body gets tickled and gets taken care of, we feel it. When our soul gets taken care of, we don't feel it. Our soul's agenda, we don't have that kind of relationship with our soul. But we have a soul within ourselves. And our goal, perhaps, throughout our life is to try to come to terms, to try to have more of a real relationship with our soul. Try to make our soul as much of a player in our life as our body. Now, if we were to do that, if we were to create this reality where our soul is as real to us as our body, when we would shake the lulav, we would feel it. You would feel it just like when you drink coffee, you have an ice cream, your body feels it. Right? And if we're able to really identify with the soul at the level that Moses and Abraham did, we would learn Torah from our soul because our soul has it within it. Our soul is spiritual. Our soul is from a different world, from a spiritual world. Hence, Abraham was able to tap from himself. What do you mean from himself? From within himself, deep within himself, he was able to tap into the power of a soul and able to exist in this spiritual world where Torah was already then. So Torah existed before Moses brought it to us, but it existed in a spiritual realm. It existed in a spiritual realm. But that spiritual realm is within each one of us. Abram was able to tap into that via the greatness of his character and his beliefs and his dedication to the mission that he was entrusted to by God. That's how Abraham studied. Now I want to tell you guys, once we're on the subject, we have a statement in the Talmud. The statement in the Talmud says, a child in utero, there's a few statements in the Talmud, a child in utero knows the entire Torah. He's about to be born, an angel comes and slaps him on his mouth, and he forgets the whole Torah. Now what does this mean? It would typically mean, he's studying Torah. What does it mean, the soul studying Torah? According to the Maharal, the great commentator of 15th or maybe 16th century commentator from Prague, from what's now Czechoslovakia, he writes, what it means that the soul studies the Torah means that a child in utero is just soul and no physicality. How do we know that? Because the Talmud elsewhere says that the physicality, the Yetzer Hara, is slapped onto the soul at birth. So hence, we have this untethered soul in utero. So of course the child knows the Torah, because soul, by definition, is from spiritual realm, and that's where the Torah already exists bountifully, unrepressed. Baby's born, he gets all the physicality slapped upon him, he forgets the Torah. Not because the Torah disappeared, just now it's muffled by the body. And your job throughout your life is to punch your holes and make that connection and connect more to your soul. And in fact, I have evidence that Maharal is right. How do I have evidence? Because if you look at the Talmud, in Nida, listen to this, guys. This is awesome. The Talmud in Nida, Tractate Nida, 30b, that says child in utero, knows the entire Torah, about to be born, angel comes, slaps him, and he forgets it. It brings a proof from a verse. Lefetach chatas rovates. 3 words. At the entrance, sin crouches. At the entrance, kind of at the entrance to the world, at the entrance, sin crouches. Forgets the Torah. Right? Sin now says plentiful. That's what it says. In Sanhedrin, a different tractate, all the way to the other end of the Talmud. Nida's the last chapter in the Talmud, the last book in the Talmud. Sanhedrin somewhere in the middle. It says, it's having this debate. When does a child get a yetzer hara? When does a child get physicality? And it says, on one opinion, it says at the time of development, which is about 40 days into the conception, post-conception. On the other opinion, it says at the time of birth. And the Talmud concludes, it must be at the time of birth. Why? And it brings a verse. You know what verse it brings? Lefetach chatas rovetz. The same exact verse that it brings to prove the child forgets the entire Torah. Now, one of the cardinal rule of all of Talmud is that every verse that teaches you a law can only be used once. So how do you have the same verse telling you, number one, the child forgets the entire Torah at birth, and number 2, the child gets the physicality at birth? The answer is because it's not telling you 2 separate things. It's telling you only one thing. Child gets the physicality, and that causes his soul to forget the Torah because it now has the physical inhibitors to the Torah. However, it's all there. We pray to God, V'tein chalkeinu b'toratecha. Give us our portion in Torah. Now, wait a minute. If we have the Torah, if it's our portion, why do we have to pray for it to be given to us? Right? And if we're praying to be given to us, obviously it's not our portion. So how do we pray, give us our portion in Torah? The answer is, it's our portion. It's within ourselves. It's within our soul. It's been there. We knew it perfectly when we were just a soul. Now, we need to access our Torah because we have the physical inhibitors. That's the answer. How did Abraham learn Torah? He had the Torah within him. And in fact, every human that post-Adam, a soul-based human, every soul-based human has a Torah within themselves because they have a soul, and the soul innately has Torah.
So that's,
but it's inaccessible to almost everyone.
So that same sentence you said is accessible to those that follow Abraham,
Well,
people, and those that don't follow Abraham.
Yes, theoretically, it's acceptable.
I'm not going to go bring into Christianity, Islam, and whatever other faiths are, but what you just said leads me to believe if everybody's descendant from Abraham, then every creature has the Torah.
Not creature, every human.
Every adult.
Every human.
I mean,
every human
has the Torah, no matter what.
That's right.
faith
Well,
that they follow.
well,
It's just that
yes,
that part is
yes.
still
Every
limited.
human who has a soul, which means every human now, the idea of a soul, of a human devoid of a soul, is something that's exists only before Adam, what we would call maybe a Neanderthal, which is kind of like a lesser developed.
I wasn't even thinking
A
of those.
human that's without a soul, right? If you look at Adam's created twice in Genesis. One time is just a body. One time is a body which is infused with a soul. So yes, every human that has a soul theoretically has more than one way to tap into Torah. Why? The simple, easiest way is now the Torah was given to us, and we can connect to it. We can read it. We can study it. It's more easily accessible to us post Sinai. However, even beforehand, the great people like Abraham were able to tap into from their own, me'atzma, from themselves, or from their kishkis, so to speak, from their innards, it was within themselves. It was like, it says, like his 2 kidneys became 2 well springs. Like from within himself, he was able to study the Torah. How did he do it? Because he was able to tap into the power of his soul. Yeah? But theoretically, everyone can do that as well. Yes, everyone who has a soul could do that as well. 2,000 years of Torah, right? The world is a project of what? Of bringing God to the world. There's 3 phases to it. There's just the idea of God. Right? Abraham is the one that we look at as being the primary force in beginning that, but obviously continuing that as well via his descendants. There's another element of God's Torah. Right? That's the next one. The next 2,000 years is Torah. And lastly is Mashiach. Mashiach is where the idea of God becomes ubiquitous. Now, we typically use the idea of Mashiach as being an individual. The word Mashiach means anointed, and the ancient form of inaugurating kings were to pour oil on them, anoint them, make them king. Right? David is called Mashiach. Saul is called Mashiach. All the great kings, right, are called Mashiach. Now, the term Mashiach, it means the individual, but it also means an idea of the world knowing about God. Everyone knowing about God. So, 3 levels of God being revealed in the world. Now, the idea of God being revealed in the world, the idea of Torah, God's wisdom being revealed, and lastly, the Mashiach, where everyone knows about that. And who is going to be instrumental in doing that? The Jewish people. How so? So the Talmud tells us, Mashiach will come in a world that is totally righteous, or in a generation that is totally wicked. Right? Messiah will come, the idea being, the world can learn about God, or the world will learn about God because of the Jewish people. However, this could happen in more than one way. Either it's an entirely righteous nation, right? And the world looks at the Jewish people, we're the model of civilization. We teach the world about morals, right? We are the ones who are kind of domesticating the world. We're teaching the world about God. Right? We're the light to the nations. Right? We are an example that everyone looks at. We're the moral guardians of the world. Right? A nation that's totally righteous, that is the idea where we teach the world about God via our piety, via our actions, via our behavior. The other side of the coin is also where the Jewish people are teaching the world about God. The whole world learns about God, and it's because of the Jewish people, but not because of our character, our positive character. Rather, we're a nation we're a generation where we're totally wicked. And when we're totally wicked, as the Torah tells us multiple times, but primarily at the end of Leviticus and the middle of Deuteronomy, when the Jewish people stray from the path of God, we stray from Torah, we get punished. And we get punished, and the punchline is always that the entire world says, why is God so angry at the Jewish people? Why is he punishing them so bad? The world learns about God. Either via us and our behavior and our being a model and our being ambassadors to God in the world, or via us being a lightning rod, or being punished and being pummeled by the world. And why is God so angry at the Jewish nation? Either way, the world learns about God via us. It's our choice how we go about doing that, which is an example of God having a roadmap for humanity, for the world, and it's a reality that the destination can change. However, the path that we use to get there is within our own hands. Right? Either we can fulfill our destiny, we could be a light to the nation, we could teach the world about God, we could be the remarkable people, the nation that we're supposed to be. Everyone looks at us for leadership. We're models for humanity. We teach the world about God. Or we could decide that we're no longer distinct. We're not going to be a special nation. We're going to be like everyone else. We're going to assimilate. We're going to lose our distinct flavor. We're going to forget the mission, the crucial mission that we were entrusted to do. We're going to get punished for it. That too will teach the world about God. Either way, the destination is the same. That's Mashiach. And it's our choice. Do we want it to be because of us or despite of us? As a result of our actions or a result of our punishments? That's the basic framework of three eras, and that's what the world's about. The world is a mission to teach the world, the blind world, about God. Back to Abraham. Abraham and his family developed the following. Right? The Torah talks about Va'nefesh asar asu b'Charan, the nation or the souls that they created in Charan. Where are these people? All we have is Abraham and his family. We have Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the 12 sons of Jacob. We have the sojourn to Egypt. We have the slavery in Egypt. We have them coming out of Egypt, the 40 years in the wilderness. We have the wonderful experiences at Mount Sinai. We have Moses dying on the doorstep of Israel. Joshua leading the nation into Israel. We have the battles of Israel. We have 393 years of skirmishes with the local indigenous population. The 31 city-states of Israel. Finally, we have King David, who finally knocks out the last remaining stronghold of foreign leadership in Israel. We have purchasing Jerusalem, Temple Mount. We have Solomon building the temple. I just ran through like 700 years. But it starts off with Abraham, and Abraham has this wonderful following, and where are they? You know where they are? They're gone. And there's many different theories presented as to why they're gone. On one hand, we see a theme that repeats itself again and again in Jewish history, where the great ideas stumble. It starts off, Abraham has a great idea, and he rallies the troops, and he develops tens of thousands of adherents. And then where are they? They fizzle out. Right? And we have the first temple, and it's wonderful, and it gets destroyed. And we have a second temple, and it's wonderful, and it gets destroyed. And hopefully we're going to have a third temple as well, and that will be kind of like the third time's the charm. Right? We have the Jewish people in Israel. We have sovereignty. We have great kings. We have the golden age of King David and King Solomon. United nation. We have the split between the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel. We have this kind of Cold War that existed for about a few hundred years. We have destruction. We have the Babylonians. We have the dispersion. We come back to Israel again. We build a temple again. We have unified, centralized leadership. It's wonderful until it's not wonderful. And we're dispersed again. And now, we're coming back to Israel. And slowly but surely, the Jewish people are being aggregated from all across the world to Israel. Israel started off with being 600,000 Jews. Now there's 6 million Jews in Israel. 10x in less than 7 years. Pretty impressive. Hopefully this will be the third time's the charm, so to speak. Abraham started a movement. And it was a very successful and dynamic movement. It fizzled out. And that's the thing we see again and again and again in Jewish history. One theory as to why those people disappeared. I want to present another theory that Abraham, he had adherents, he had an idea, he had an inspiration, but it was an untethered inspiration. People knew about God, but they didn't know what to do about it. They had God, but they didn't have Torah. And inspiration, where it's not translated into action, where it's not part of your daily life, eventually will disappear. And we see this again and again, where the Jewish people, if they have God but they don't have Torah, their days are numbered. We have the statement brought down in the Talmud where God says, "Halavai osi azavu v'torasi shamaru." If only the Jewish people abandoned God but kept the Torah. Why? Because the Torah will bring them back to God. Practice, observance of Judaism, that is what's going to keep the Jewish people as a nation for millennia. If it's just the idea of God, but it's not translated into action, it's not grounded in a way of life, it's going to disappear. So yes, Abraham was a great leader, and Abraham was a very dynamic speaker, and Abraham was so successful in teaching the multitudes about God. What did they do with it? How did they integrate that into their lives? How will that perpetuate to their descendants? You know how? It didn't. They didn't have Torah.
I thought many of his followers went to Asia and started the Eastern religions.
That's a theory. We don't have no idea where these people are. No, it maybe yes, maybe no. It's like later on in history we learn about the 10 lost tribes. And now everyone and their grandmother claims to be from the lost tribes, people from Africa and from Nepal and from Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan and India, the Bnei Moshe, the Bnei Menashe, the Bnei this, the Bnei that. Everyone claims to be these 10 lost tribes. And they have this practice, totally not Jewish, but they light Hanukkah candles, every night. or they have these traditions, this and that. We don't know. We don't know, and question how relevant it is. So yes, maybe no.
Buddhism at a spiritual level it's a very similar sort of philosophy.
Yeah, but Buddhism and Hinduism, those things are very distant from Judaism. Close religion to Judaism, as uncomfortable it is to say it, is Islam. By far. But it's still very distant. But the closest, let me correct that, closest thing to Jewish theology is Islam. There's no religion which is close to Judaism, because if you're even a little bit different, then you're different. It's not Judaism. But the Jewish view of God is almost identical to the Islamic view of God. As opposed to the Christians, they have this whole trilogy thing where they kind of give divine status to something which is not divine. So that's kind of bordering on idolatry. Is it quite idolatry or not? That's a debate right in the Talmud. But either way, the closest thing to Judaism with regards to theology, our belief of God, is Islam. yes, spirituality is a very popular thing now throughout the world, and in Near Asia, just the Near East, where they have like these gurus. It's very popular, very kind of like a statutory religion, so to speak. And ironically, the Jewish people were that way as well 2,000 years ago. The idea of the Roman historian Dio Cassius writes that Rome had in excess of 30,000 gods. That was ancient paganism. 30,000. Probably, like all Roman historians, they are wont to exaggerate. So probably it's an exaggeration, but either way, that was the kind of the method. The method was that every nation that you swallowed up, you kind of adopted their gods, and there's the god for this, and the god for that, and the god for this, and these powers. Come along the Jewish people with this novel idea: there's only one God, and there's only one, and nothing else has power aside from God Himself, and everything exists only because God gives them the right and the power to exist. That was a very novel idea. It was very exotic. It was an exotic religion, kind of very similar to what we would say Buddhism is today, where it's like, it's spirituality, this and that, it's connection to nature, Yes, but the central character in Judaism is God. We know that, and the definition of God, I would say, is more similar to what Islam has than anyone else.
Is the God in Judaism, the ultimate God, is that the same God in Christianity and in Islam?
Like I said,
identical.
Like I said, it's
power?
certainly not in Christianity, because first of all, in Christianity there is this idea of three. I don't want to get into.
When we eliminate two-thirds in Christianity, is the God.
The Jewish definition of God is a single entity, not composed of any parts, that is not bound by time or space, that created everything. Everything came, it's a first existence that brought everything else into existence. It doesn't have any parts or particles. It doesn't have any bodies. It doesn't have any emotions or feelings or anything like that. It doesn't have any of the restrictions or the finite borders of anything that we see in the physical world. That's a basic Jewish definition of God. Maimonides gives 5 characteristics of God. I have a wonderful video on YouTube. I would just advise everyone to Google it. The 9 characteristics of God collected from. That's my own video that I made. I would advise everyone. The 9 characteristics of God. You can look at it. Google it. So that, I think that if you want to just how we define God, I would tell you to advise you to look at that video. Plus, I want to raise the views on YouTube. But yes, Christianity, that they do not have that same. No, Islam, I would say is I wouldn't say it's the same thing, but I would say it's the closest you'll get. Maimonides writes, he says, listen, you're allowed to go if you were forced to go into a mosque, you're allowed to go in a mosque, you're even allowed to pray in a mosque. Why? Because we're praying to the same God, even though the application, what to do about that, is drastically different. We have the Torah, and they have the Quran, right? But as opposed to walking into a church, it may be equivalent to walking into a house of idolatry, and we're not allowed to walk into a house of idolatry. Moving right along, where were we? Okay, so we have Abraham has a little bit of something other than pure Judaism within him. He has a son by the name of Ishmael. Like we said, Ishmael kind of does hold kind of somewhat of the mantle of Abrahamic monotheism, and we know that's the Arabs, but Abraham's descendants are not purely the Jewish people. Neither are Isaac's. Comes along Jacob. Jacob's called the Bechir Ha'avot, the perfect blend of the forefathers. And Jacob was the one who was renamed Israel. Why? Because Jacob has this transition of being a man who is going to be on the individual level, Jacob, but also on the national level, he is kind of a microcosm of the Jewish people, hence he's renamed Israel. He had 12 sons. These 12 sons are going to comprise the 12 families, eventually 12 tribes, that are going to be the 12 families and the Jewish people, the 12 tribes. Now, for thousands, but probably at least 1,000 years afterwards, the Jewish people were still had the tribal structure. Israel was divided up into 12 tribes. It was partitioned into the tribes lived amongst each other, and they had some sort of a tribal affiliation, so to speak. Nowadays, the Jewish people, we don't know who come from which tribe, with the exception of a Cohen. We know Cohen and a Levi come from the Levite tribes, and now it's all mixed together. But the term Jew comes from the Judah. The term Yehudi is from tribe of Yehuda. Why? Because Judea and Samaria, the Jewish name for the West Bank, which is the western part of the Jordan River, is called Judea and Samaria. Why? Because in the book of Joshua, when it talks about the partition of the land of Israel to the conquering nation of that had left Egypt, the parts that are what's now the West Bank were given to the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Shimon, hence Judea and Samaria. Ta-da! Yehuda v'Shomron. That's why it's till this day. Israel, Jacob is going to have to become someone that he's not comfortable with. And remember, Nachmanides writes, we're told a lot about the forefathers because ma'aseh avot siman labanim. The actions of the forefathers is a guiding light to the children. Right? The challenges that Jacob, the individual, will undergo mirror the challenges the Jewish nation in its entirety will also undergo. So we have our interactions with Lavan, very long narratives about Jacob and his father-in-law, Lavan or Laban, and how they had to interact. And Jacob naturally was a very honest person. And he had to develop skills to be wily and cunning enough to engage and interact with his father-in-law. Jacob was not one who was very comfortable in battle. But he had to meet his brother and he had to prepare for the reality of battle in the Jewish nation. We're going to have to develop laws. What do Jews know about laws and organized civil structures of a country? We're going to have to learn how to do that. That's Jacob transitioning into Israel. What do we know about war? Right? Not that much, but we're going to have to learn about that. Right? Jacob learns about war, learns about how to deal with the reality of you being a Jew, you being different and distinct from the nations, and you constantly butting heads with your neighbors and the other philosophies that you're going to encounter, with 3,000 years of Jewish history. Jacob is also faced with many challenges. You think Jacob, he's got the perfect blend, right? All 12 of his kids are all on the straight and narrow. They're all part of the Jewish people. They're all righteous. What does he have? Trouble after trouble after trouble. He has trouble with his brother, trouble with his father-in-law, trouble with his wives, trouble again with his brother. And finally, he settles down in Israel after a tumultuous 25 years trip east, where he gets married, and the whole deal and the whole infighting with his competitiveness between his wives and the brothers and this and that. He settles down. What happens? Joseph gets kidnapped. The whole story: Joseph gets sold to slavery. The entire Jewish nation, or what was then the Jewish family, goes to Egypt. And Egypt was a place where they stayed for about 200 some odd years, and where they eventually were encountered in slavery, exile. The Egyptian exile was the first major exile. And this is something we see multiple times. You have the Egyptian exile. The Jews get out of the Egyptian exile. They go into Israel. They build the temple. They have the Babylonian exile. The Babylonians come. Right? First Sanhedrin, and then Nebuchadnezzar. Sanhedrin, he destroyed the northern, is what's called the Israel kingdom. And then Nebuchadnezzar comes and destroys the southern Israel kingdom, which was kingdom of Judah. He disperses the Jews. They're right now. They all have to go east to Babylon. They come back and they have to deal with the Persians. The Persians, where their very existence was threatened. After the Persian exile, they have what's called the Greek or the Hellenized structure, which is more of an internal turmoil, factionalism with the Jewish people, sectarianism with the Jewish people, Jews fighting Jews, Jews having to deal with influences that are contrary to our basic construct as a nation. That passes. You have the Romans. The Romans also have their ways of looking at things, more of a military challenges. They destroy the temple. We have the Great Revolt. We have the Bar Kokhba Revolt. We're trying to maintain our status and our central authority in the basic framework of who we are as a nation. That passes. We have the Byzantines. We have to live under their control. We have the Ottomans. We have the Almohads. We have the Muslims. We have an ever-present struggle of being in different nations and being under oppression. We go to Europe. What do we have there? Only 1,000 years of inquisitions, of crusades, of pogroms, of blood libels, of Holocaust, of whatnot. And now we're in America, and we're in Israel. And what is the idea? What's the meaning behind all this travels, never being settled, or never settled for that long as a nation? So there's various answers given. The answer that I like is that we are going to be an eternal nation. That's what we're told about, an eternal nation. Not only that, we're going to be the perfect nation, the model nation. When the Torah talks about what the Jewish nation looks at its best, you will be a nation of kings, mamlechas kohanim, your kingdom of priests and a holy nation. In Exodus, chapter, the teens probably. That's what we are. How are we going to develop these skills of being the perfect model nation? We're going to go to Egypt. We're going to spend 100 years there. We're going to take from them their best quality. We're going to move on. And slowly we're going to aggregate all the skills of all the various nations into one kind of super nation. So yes, we're going to have to spend time in every country. We're going to live in every country in Europe. We're going to live in Russia. We're going to live in North Africa. We're going to be under the influences of the Romans, of the Persians, of the Babylonians, of the Byzantines, of the Ottomans, etc. And we're going to assemble all the great skills and kind of, while maintaining our Jewish identity, also develop other skills and kind of take the best from all the nations and use that to hone our collective character into being the perfect nation.
We're doing it already.
Well, of course we are. But right now we have the benefit of looking back and seeing. And you look today. I'm saying this is obviously a crude example, but you look today. I got the recent Forbes 400 list. I don't know if you guys read this, but I got it in the mail. So I was reading it over the holiday, and I was just looking at the names. It's like, ooh, so much money. But you look at that. You look at the first 100 names. More than half of them are Jewish, of wealthiest people in America. We're 2% of America. It's incredible. Jew. I know that sounds like it's like anti-Semitic. Oh, the Jews control finance, but I know, and this is also a crude way of measuring success. But we see that Jews are remarkably successful in every area that they try. And the 22% of all Nobel Prize winners, once again, is that the best metric for success? I don't know, but it is a metric for success. And 22%, even though 0.2% of humanity is Jewish, less than 1% of humanity is Jewish, yet we are way beyond exponentially successful in many, many, many areas. So yes, we do seem to be that super nation, whether you like it or not, whether it has a tinge of what you might consider to be anti-Semitism or a certain variant form of anti-Semitism. It's still a remarkable fact that is undeniable that the Jewish people today, after all our collective history, we have something remarkable about us.
I think in our country, in the U.S., I think the Asians have sort of overtaken.
Oh, no, they haven't. Oh, no, they haven't.
Intellectual. Remember, we got a skewed population coming in from Asia.
Oh,
Where does the phrase "the people of the book"? I mean, I know I've heard it a long time.
Jewish people were always literate. Maimonides says if you live in a city that does not have a school, that doesn't teach everyone how to read, how to write, how to learn, should be burned down. Right? We were always literate. We always had almost 100% literacy when the rest of the world had 1% literacy. So yes, we were always dedicated. And remember, Jewish people I don't know where that phrase originated from, but the idea Jewish people remain Jewish because of our knowledge, because of our Torah. Once you take the Jewish people away from Torah, well, you might have Jewish people with an idea, but an idea that's not grounded in a way of practice, in a belief, in a doctrine, then the Jewish people disappear. So yes, if you take
Israel is a very secular society. I don't know what percent, 80% are secular. talk to Israelis, they never go to synagogue. They never, they live Judaism.
Yeah, Jews. Listen, Jews are Jews whether or not they choose to be Jewish or not. A Jew to be baptized 100 times, they might get wet, but they're still Jewish. And you see a lot of remarkable people that have had remarkable success in whatever area that they, that were baptized as to be non-Jew, but they're still Jewish, and they cannot help themselves, so to speak, that they're Jewish and they remain Jewish and they have the Jewish influence and they have the Jewish determinism, the Jewish quality of being driven to change the world. That's within them, whether they like it or not.
So that's when you got to the idea of the souls way back.
Well, no, it's the idea of the what we would call maybe the Abraham's trait, the trait of Abraham, which is being innovative, being driven, being determined, going against the grain, thinking differently, thinking out of the box, thinking creatively, and being determined to maintain your idea to its conclusion. If someone were to claim, I don't want to get sidetracked with this, but to claim that the Asians are more successful than the Jews is the Asians are. It's not true. It's not true because remember the Asians. We're dealing with billions and billions of people. Like so much so, I like this. Perhaps my favorite bit of information of all time, is that in the year 2000 they made a census in China, and every census you have a margin of error, 2 or 3%. So there's the margin of error for the census in China was 48 million people. 48 million people, which means that the number is anywhere in the 96 million person range. Jewish people, we're 15 million people? 17, 15, it's not so clear. We don't have exact data on this. The point is that we are so overrepresented in every area. Now, you say, every Indian that I met is just an incredible scientist. But there's a billion of them that are living on $1 a day. The best ones come to this country.
That's what I was talking about, in this country, not over there.
Yeah, but okay, this is a debate we could argue about it.
Yeah, because,
So we hear about the concept, or I have.
Yeah.
Judaism is clearly not a religion for the masses, right? It requires, a lot of, not just the rules, but the learning. It was never designed to be a religion for the masses. And so, as you pointed out, there's just a small infinitesimal percentage of the world's population that is Judaism, that's Jewish. Is that by design by God, do you think, that we occupy such a small portion of the world's population, or is it just a function of what Judaism requires other religions?
Yes, so it is by design. Okay. It is by design, but it's also it's kind of the best of both worlds. We, as Jews, we have this responsibility, but we also have this opportunity and this benefit of being Jews. There's the positive of it because we are the leaders of the world. We are. We're the ones who are taking responsibility for all of humanity. That's what it means. That's the mission statement of the Jewish people. A nation is going to teach the world via the Torah principles about God and taking responsibility for all of humanity. If humanity fails, it's our fault. If humanity succeeds, or when humanity succeeds, it's going to be because of us. Now, someone's born a non-Jew. Well, they have the option to join, but they don't have the responsibility to join. So it's kind of the thing where, yes, a lot is demanded upon us, and that works. That's a benefit, but it's also a challenge. It's a responsibility. If someone else wants to join, they're welcome to do so.
Why doesn't God want us Jews to go out and proselytize and get people?
Because
They didn't they, in certain eras?
Yeah, well, that's a debate. It's a debate. Because you don't need to be Jewish to be good. That's the point. We don't have this universal. We have a universal perspective, but not that you have to be Jewish to be good. You have to believe in God to be good. But you have very, very righteous. I'm saying we have a different perspective than Muslims. Muslims say everyone has to be Muslim for the world. If you're not Muslim, it's Dar al-Harb. Dar al-Islam, which is a very fundamental Islamic belief. What it means, I don't know, but it's a fundamental Islamic belief. It's part of the basic framework of Islam, that there's Dar al-Harb and Dar al-Islam, which means the nation of sword and the nation of Islam. If you're either with us, then great, or you're a nation of sword, whatever that means, we're not going to debate. Christianity is going to say, yes, you have to believe in Jesus. You don't believe in Jesus, eternal damnation. What do we say? Chasidei umot ha'olam yesh lam chenet l'olam haba. Righteous members of the nations have a portion of the world to come. You don't need to be Jewish to be good. You don't need to be Jewish to be righteous. You don't need to be Jewish to do what's required of you and to help the world. So that's why you don't have to be Jewish to be good. Right? You could be a wonderful non-Jew, and that's great. You could get a portion of the world to come, which means you can actually fulfill your mission and be a positive influence in the world. You have to believe in God. You have to be Jewish. You have to follow the 7 Noahide laws. You don't have to be Jewish. We're the ones who are accepting responsibility for everyone. Right? We're the ones who are saying not only we're going to pull our weight, we're going to pull everyone else's weight. That responsibility was a responsibility that Abraham accepted, and Abraham accepted for him and for for his descendants. If someone else says, you know what, I want to be part of this crucial mission to save humanity, they're welcome to join. We accept converts. We don't force it upon them. They're welcome to join.
So what about Rabbi Akiva? Wasn't he a convert?
Rabbi Akiva is a great example. Rabbi Akiva was a descendant of converts. Rabbi Akiva was instrumental in Judaism today only just because of Rabbi Akiva and his students. Right? They were a vital artery of transmission of Torah. Jews without Torah equals non-Jews. We don't have Judaism exists only because we have a Torah. We have, like we said, Abraham had an idea and he taught that idea, but didn't have Torah, so it doesn't perpetuate. You know, the Jewish people is the mobile homeland. The Torah is the mobile homeland of the Jewish people. So yes, without Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Akiva was a descendant of converts, and he was so significant in Jewish life and philosophy that, according to the Talmud in Menachos 28b, it says that Moses asks God, "How come there are these crowns on top of the letters of the Torah?" So God tells him, because there's going to be a man in many, many, many generations by the name of Akiva ben Yosef, Akiva son of Yosef, who will derive laws from each and every crown. Piles and piles of laws from each and every crown. He says, oh, really? Why do you give the Torah from me? We should give the Torah through him. That's our view on Rabbi Akiva, and he was a descendant of converts. Yes, we live in a meritocracy. Right? The Torah world is a meritocracy. So much so that the Talmud says, the Mishnah says in Horius, if you have a Kohen Gadol, the high priest, which is the highest office in Jewish spiritual world, is the high priest, but he's not a Torah scholar. And then you have a mamzer, who is a Torah scholar. What's a mamzer? Mamzer is someone who's born of a forbidden relationship. The word we use in English is a bastard. Who is they can't marry a Jew. A mamzer can't marry a Jew, right? If he's a product of adultery or incest or something like that, it's a forbidden relationship. They are not allowed to intermarry the Jewish people. They are pariahs in the Jewish people. But he's a Torah scholar. He comes first. Why? Because we believe it's a meritocracy. So if someone is a non-Jew converts, they could be as great as like Rabbi Akiva, and that's fine. The Rambam writes, Maimonides writes, it says we listen to the truth from whoever it comes from. Maimonides brings from Aristotle and something like that. Well, Aristotle was someone who supported infanticide and then did all the grossest sins possible, but if he has truth and he has wisdom, we accept that from wherever it comes from. Yes?
Responsibility, that's why there's just a few people, even in the world when you look, few people take actual responsibility. It's the same thing, I think, with the Jewish people, we take responsibility.
And the point is that we take responsibility innately. Even if, like you mentioned, there's lots of Jews today, even though the numbers are changing drastically, especially in Israel, where the adoption rates of Judaism and observance are just shooting through the roof. Whereas the foundation of the state was based upon a very secular perspective. The original Zionists, someone like Herzl. Herzl wasn't even into Israel. He wanted Uganda. All he wanted was a state for the Jews. It didn't even have the ring of going back to Israel and reclaiming Zion.
He wanted Uganda as a temporary place.
No, that's not true. He was very happy with Uganda. In fact, he was threatened to quit Zionism. It was a huge. It was the second or third Zionist Congress in Switzerland in 1905. He pushed the idea of listen, we're going to get a huge tract of land in Uganda, and it'll be great. Because he had a very secular perspective of what this Jewish state would look like. And that's what the Jewish foundation of the Jewish state was. And the great leaders of Zionism were all Jews that had rejected Judaism, were grown up in observant families. David Ben-Gurion was David Green, and his family was Torah scholars, and Shimon Peres and Rabin. All of them came from observant backgrounds and had rejected that. And that's how the foundation of the state began. But progressively, it has grown to be more Jewish and more traditional as time has moved on. Whereas today you have 35% of the country is basically observant. So yes, the Jewish people, the Jewish nation is slowly, progressively moving more and more towards a real Jewish country. There's going to be a movement, I believe, within the next 50 years, for sure, where Jewish law will actually be in place. At least Jewish civil law will be the law of the land, even though.
If Israel still exists.
Oh, Israel's not going anywhere. Think about it. If someone told you in 1970 that in 20 years one of these two countries won't be around, either Israel or the Soviet Union, people would say, Israel's gone. Because, Israel's been around for a long, long time. Yes, and it starts off, like we mentioned, with Abraham. It starts off stumbling. And it starts off and you say, wait a minute, this guy Herzl, who is the furthest from being a traditional Jew, the most assimilated Jew that there could possibly imagine, he's going to be the one who's going to bring the Jews back to Israel or begin a movement that will eventually be... Yes, it starts off and you're like, how is this going to bring about what the Torah talks about?
You think his interest really came primarily from the Dreyfus case?
That's what they say. Moving right along, we have another 3 minutes. Let's. Okay, we can go a little longer. That's fine. So Exodus, we have the Jewish people. We mentioned that they're in exile. It's a pattern that repeats itself multiple times. We have Moses. Once again, Moses is an example of a leader that's a very curious leader. This is another thing we see again and again. We talked about Rabbi Akiva. We talked about someone like Herzl, people that came from backgrounds that you wouldn't say are exactly on the straight and narrow. It's like cookie cutter leadership profiles. Moses grows up as in Pharaoh's home. He was abandoned as a kid because he was someone who they were worried. There was like we mentioned, infanticide. Pharaoh. We know the story in the beginning of Exodus. Pharaoh says, "I want to kill all the Jewish males." He grows up in Pharaoh's home, and he has to make an identity choice of: am I going to be faithful to my roots as a Jew, or I'm going to be someone who's going to take kind of a mantle of leadership in the oppressing the Jews? Kind of decision he had to make. You wouldn't look at him as being someone who would be a natural leader of the Jewish people. You look at David. David was seemingly the least remarkable of the sons of Jesse. In fact, he was an afterthought. Like Samuel comes to Jesse's home and says, "One of your kids is going to be the king." This one, not this one, not this one. Not all 6 of them. He's like, it's not any of them. Is there any more sons? He says, yes. He's a redhead. He was hanging out with the shepherd. He's not remarkable. He's the youngest one. Everyone takes him and goes like this because he's a gingy. They grab his head and go like this. He's the one. Saul, the first king of the Jewish people, Saul, he was the model of a king. He was the tallest man, head and shoulders above everyone, the greatest scholar, a great warrior, perfect what you would say, cookie cutter king. And what happens to him? 2 years, and it just ends in tragedy. And the model of kingship is David. And then who's the next king after David? Solomon. Who's his mother? Bathsheba. Like, this is going to be Jewish royalty. Right? Where did that come from? We have the story of Judah and Tamar, Judah and his son-in-law in Genesis, right? Judah has a son-in-law, has a daughter-in-law. She marries his oldest son, marries the next son. After he dies, she's determined to have a progeny from Judah. She dresses up like a prostitute. She seduces him, like
she takes his ring.
She takes his ring and his staff, so to speak, right? And this is going to be, and she has twins from him. This is going to be the father of the Jewish people, of the Messiah. And then fast forward a couple hundred years, and you have the story of Ruth and Boaz. Once again, she slips. Boaz, the great leader, and she gets in there. It's a story. Like, this is the story of the Jewish leaders. Yes, we have leaders, and we have leadership stories, and we have redemption that comes in what we would call oblique fashion. It's again and again. It's Moses. It's Rabbi Akiva. It's we could even say it's Herzl. Like, this is going to be someone. It's the nation of this state of Israel, which is the most secular state. Just at its founding. Yes, there's always going to be a progression from. We can calculate. It's not going to be the way we expect. Kind of the way God's going to bring about the redemption.
I'm always fascinated that Rabbi Akiva doesn't learn even to read until, isn't he in his 40s?
Yeah,
and
40.
His wife is the one that teaches.
Yes, that's
So it's always an
right.
amazing
Yes. We have. Is there a question in the back?
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
I saw a hand there raised. I saw. You raise your hand? Yes.
One of those I was going to say about the shed.
Yes. Let's quickly move along. We could get let's get all the way to the story of Joshua. We could do it really quickly. We have the book of the 5 books of the Torah end where Moses dies. So we have all the stories of the Torah, but we have also a way of life. The Jewish people, they have the Exodus. What happens with the Exodus? 10 plagues, remarkable. God's interacting with the Jewish people on a supernatural level. And then you have the splitting of the sea 7 days later. And then 50 days later, you have the most momentous event at Mount Sinai. Moses goes up to heavens. He disappears for 40 days and 40 nights. He comes back, somewhat of a tragedy. Some people are worshiping the golden calf. He goes back. God wants to destroy the people. He goes back again. He prays for them. He goes back a third time, gets back the second set of tablets, returns back on Yom Kippur. God says, I've forgiven as per your request. They build a tabernacle. They're in the wilderness for 40 years. They live a supernatural life. They have their food rains down from heaven. Their clothing grows with them. They drink water from a rock. They're surrounded by day with the cloud, which smooths out mountains and clears away stumbling blocks. At night, they have this pillar of fire. They're moving from place to place. They don't know when they're going. They're studying Torah. They have Moses, the prophet. They're living basically kind of this unreal existence. Moses dies on the footstep of Israel. Joshua is the leader. Joshua, the Talmud says, the face of Moses was like the face of the sun. The face of Joshua was the face of the moon. Joshua kind of reflects Moses. He's like a leader that kind of, if you look at it, maybe it's the same size as Moses, but it's not quite the same. It's not quite the same. They're going to go into Israel. They're going to have to live a natural life. Kind of the supernatural existence that they had during these 40 years isn't sustainable. And it's not really what God wants. God wants them to be in Israel, living like normal humans, having to have the struggle for livelihood, having to have the interactions of a state, dealing with neighbors, dealing with battles, dealing with unfriendly influences. They're going to have to take the lessons that they learned at Mount Sinai and inject that into a world where they no longer have these miracles every day. They no longer have this great prophet Moses that converses to God face to face. They still have prophets. They still have great leaders. They still have a lot of the influences of Moses. They still remember Moses, but it's not going to be the same. And the challenges are going to be remarkably different. And I guess we'll pick up from there.
Battles? Can you help me? Is the Jericho in there?
Yeah, Jericho was the first battle. That's right.
That's open. With Joshua, we have the battle with Jericho. And
That's
what
right.
other,
That's right.
can you?
So we'll talk about next week. We'll talk more about. I guess we got.
Be there, but-
So you'll be able to listen in online on the website rabbiwolbe.com. So that's that. So we covered basically from Abraham to I guess to Joshua. So we didn't even get that far. But we kind of got a flavor of somewhat of the patterns that repeat themselves again and again. Some of the insights of the grand picture of the 6,000 years, and also the idea of us trying to reach a certain conclusion with or without us, as a result of us, or despite of us. I guess next week we'll pick up from where we left off and try to make some further headway. Now we still have 3,300 years to go, so we'd cover 500. Okay, if anyone is interested, I brought my lulav.